everybody, and welcome to a Back to Basics video in two ways, because yes, this is the type of video that was more common on the channel in years past, but also it is for those that need to be basic with the fantasy genre. Here is my introduction recommendations to reading fantasy, updated for 2024. As I have come to read more fantasy, I believe I can do a better job than I've done before of telling you all where to get started. And for those of you who have already read plenty of fantasy out there, consider this a good test to see if you have gotten a lot of the important reads for the genre you love under your belt. And we're going to handle this list in a bit of a special way, where I'm going to try and avoid handing you massive must-finish series from Go, and instead offer a variety selection of reads that you can get through fairly easily, and if you enjoy, can provide paths for you to continue forward. So come with me and you'll see a not copyright infringing lyric level of wonder. Let's begin. Now, we are in the era, or at least the tail ends, I would say, of the peak of the era of grimdark fantasy being the face of fantasy, because of the popularity of a recent show and of the books that inspired it that have still not been finished somehow. And you will see on so many lists online, people saying if you like grimdark, you want to try out fantasy, go Joe Abercrombie. And that is not a bad way to go at all. But I feel like can trip up some potential fantasy fans for good reason. One, the first Law book is not the strongest. It's good, and the series gets excellent from there, but it has plot and pacing issues that, unless you are a very character-devoted reader, can be a turnoff. There's an argument to be made that you could start with First Law standalones, but I would then counter that, yeah, technically true, but I would enjoy them more having read the First Law books. So instead, for grimdark, I am going to recommend a world that is darker, but maintains a happier tone due to its characters, which I feel like will be a really good test to see if you want to go darker, or if that was about your limit and you want to go in another direction. And that is actually going to be The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. The Lies of Locke Lamora is described as: an orphan's life is harsh and often short in the mysterious island city of Comore. But young Locke Lamora dodges death and slavery, becoming a thief under the tutelage of a gifted con artist. As leader of the band of light-fingered brothers, known as the Gentlemen Bastards, Locke is soon infamous, fooling even the underworld's most feared ruler. But in the shadows lurks someone still more ambitious and deadly, faced with a bloody coup that threatens to destroy everyone and everything that holds meaning in his mercenary life. Locke vows to beat the enemy at his own brutal game, or die trying. Certainly a grim and dark world, but not on that grim dark level you see from books like Prince of Thorns or others so commonly tossed around for people who are eager to get into a berserkian level of depravity. Lies of Locke Lamora is an anti-hero tale of individuals you can very easily find yourself getting behind, trying to survive in a world that is far eviler than they are. They are the best of a bad situation, and they are such an oddly charming and hilarious duo to follow. Locke, Lamora, and Jean. Thieves of the greatest variety. It's like if you were watching an episode of Game of Thrones, but suddenly the plot turned into Ocean's 11, but not in a bad way. Like, you can see how that would be a very bad version of that in a good way. I'm also happy to say this is a Mistborn type situation as well, where if you love the first book, there is a series for you to continue on with. Yet, the first book can be just enjoyed on its own. And if when I mentioned the character focus from Joe Abercrombie, that kind of perked your ears, the exact same thing exists here for Lies of Locke Lamora, just with a, I would say, more engaging plot from Go that First Law finds later on. There have also been recent rumblings from Scott Lynch, the author, that the series might actually find its next and possibly final entry soon, so it's just a good time to check out Eyes of Locke Lamora, aka the Gentleman Bastard sequence as well. I would also say if you're someone who, before you've tried getting into fantasy, is very much so into the atmosphere of a book, you want someone who can just paint a picture, not with necessarily descriptions, but just the words they choose. That is an area I feel Eyes of Locke Lamora actually does top Joe Abercrombie's writing. It is one of the most atmospheric in terms of just grime without overwhelmingly putting a negative taste in your mouth the fantasy genre has produced. It's got a good undercurrent of black comedy as well, which comedy within writing I know is very hit or miss for people, though I'm happy to say, personally, I've never had someone say the jokes within Eyes of Locke Lamora did not land for them. Just know there are gonna be many descriptions as well of stuff that's gonna make you go, "Ugh." Piss Barrel is just still one I can't get out of my head. It's got that buddy cop vibe. You root for them, you see their flaws in them, but it makes you love the duo all the more. And they manage to be the type of villain where it's like, I want to take a walk on the wild side with you.
So with the right partner in crime, you can put on quite a show.
I don't know why, maybe TMI. When I picture Locke Lamora the first time I was reading it, I pictured the furry Robin Hood guy. I got no, why? Why was that in my head? No idea. And if you like Eyes of Locke Lamora, Abercrombie, if just boom to bang. Or if you want something that's, yeah, grimy, but maybe a bit more on that epic scale, shift on over to Brian McClellan's Powder Mage trilogy. And there you get the added benefit of seeing fantasy with Flintlock fantasy. Just so many infinite cool points there. They snort, just, it's great. Check out Powder Mage. But I hear you. There's probably some people out there who are going, no, 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 stop with all this anti-series stuff. I want a series to read. Give me something that's not overwhelming, but has a few books that I can commit to and come to really comprehend the larger vision the author's trying to paint. I got you. And this is also gonna fill another recommendation that I feel like I have missed on previous lists due to just not having consumed this series yet, and that would be The Bulgariad by David Eddings. Pawn of Prophecy, the first book in The Bulgariad, is described as, a battle is coming, and in that battle shall be decided the fate of the world. Myths tell of ancient wars of gods and men, and a powerful object, the orb, that ended the bloodshed. As long as it was held by the line of Riva, it would assure the peace. But a dark force has stolen the orb, and the prophecies tell of war. Young farm boy, Garion, knows nothing of myth or fate. But then, the mysterious old storyteller visits his aunt, and they embark on a sudden journey, pursued by evil forces with only a small band of companions they can trust. Garion begins to doubt all he thought he knew. And this is totally not Lord of the Rings. Many times on this channel before, I have claimed that The Wheel of Time is the definitive transition series for the fantasy genre from the classic to the modern state in terms of how of its focuses and the way Jordan to Sanderson was handling so much stuff, and I maintain that is largely still true. But just as much so, if not a smidge more, The Bulgariad is that bridge. 5 books, all of which very consumable, absolutely pay homage to Tolkien in the most foundational ways to what makes up the Bulgariad. It is a Tolkien-inspired series, yet the way the characters interact, talk, and world breathes begins to feel more modern, and David Eddings was absolutely someone on that Jordan level who loved what fantasy was, but saw what it could also be. But you should go into the Bulgariad expecting a classic fantasy adventure. Wizards, rangers, good, evil, it's all there. And it has the benefit of not being nearly the level of commitment you get from The Wheel of Time. And if you find yourself really liking the Bulgariad and you want more of that kind of, oh, this is absolutely fantasy, but maybe a bit more from the just classic roots we got, don't worry, I got you as well. There is a so natural transition from David Eddings to Raymond E. Feist. I would start with Magician, or if you want something that's even a bit more modern, and I believe deserves more hype despite being pretty hyped already, I would recommend Michael J. Sullivan's The Rhaenyra Revelations. Just addressing an elephant that is in the room with every must-read fantasy list, brapping away with its trunk. Tolkien is here, and it is not a bad idea to start your fantasy reading journey with The Hobbit. Yet I don't really want to get in too much to why it should be recommended to you and all that, because I'm fairly certain, unless you've been living under a stack of enchanted rocks, you know about The Hobbit, and you know its importance and why it's a good starting touch point for the fantasy genre. But hopefully scratching a similar itch for massive Hobbit fans, I actually do want to recommend a book that could be seen as a bit simple, but I regard as one, a bit underappreciated among like young adult fantasy readers, and two, an absolutely awesome education on how the fantastical genre can be used to explore ideas, morality, not dumbed down, but in an accessible way for children. Think of it as starting with an incredibly simple piano exercise so that you can then tackle the larger, more complex stories later on. And that is going to be The Little Prince. The Little Prince is described as a pilot stranded in the desert, awakes one morning to see standing before him the most extraordinary little fellow. "Please," asked the stranger, "draw me a sheep." And the pilot realizes that when life's events are too difficult to understand, there is no choice but to succumb to their mysteries. He pulls out a pencil and paper, and thus begins this wise and enchanting fable that in teaching the secret of what is really important in life has changed forever the world of its readers. This imaginative, whimsical French story has been translated and published around the world for good reason. Yes, it is absolutely a kid's book. It is one that you should be reading to your sons, daughters, nieces, and nephews. Your nephews. It's also, in my opinion, a good litmus test to see if your imagination will let you get lost in fictional worlds because, while it is short, the pictures painted and the adventure gone on by our little prince are on a level rarely accomplished even in books 10 times the length. You must walk before you can run, and while I'm sure you'd be able to pick up a whole lot from reading a ton of different fantasy books, here it's just a good, safe starting point and is one that so easy to get done. I feel like it's just a must for any basic recommended fantasy list at this point for me, right along next to The Hobbit. And if you really love The Little Prince and just want to read more like it, if you somehow have not read The Hobbit, go there. And I would also say if you somehow have not read Alice in Wonderland, go that direction. And if you're looking for a longer commitment, a greater series that can inspire a similar level of whimsy and otherworldliness, then I would recommend, despite my own not personal preference for it, The Chronicles of Narnia. Say what you will about C.S. Lewis, the man could write a journey you can get lost in. I have my criticisms of Chronicles of Narnia, but that would just be objectively wrong not to say, and I feel like in terms of those strengths, there is a real crossover with The Little Prince. Also, if you enjoyed The Little Prince, but want something that's a little more adult, stepping from a similar level of whimsy, but just in a very different presentation and tone, going from here to Wizard of Earthsea, I feel like could be a very specific pivot that if this wasn't quite right, could be absolutely up your alley. That's emphasis. I can already hear them commenting, so I'm going to address the Sanderson in the room.
Run.
If you've somehow been living under fewer rocks, but still some rocks, you may not be aware that fantasy as a whole kind of has a rock star author who is at their peak right now. His name is Brandon Sanderson, and without having any adaptations of his work, he is outselling almost everyone else in the genre. And to my amazement when I was looking into this, there was actually a law passed in 2022 that you cannot say you're a big fantasy fan without having read at least one Sanderson book, and it comes with a 3-year prison sentence if you violate it. So just for your own legal safety, I would recommend picking up Mistborn. Mistborn is described as, for 1,000 years, the ash fell and no flowers bloomed. For 1,000 years, the Ska slaved in misery and lived in fear. For 1,000 years, the Lord Ruler, the sliver of infinity, reigned with absolute power and ultimate terror, divinely invincible. Then, when hope was so long lost that not even its memory remained. A terrible, scared, heartbroken half-ska rediscovered it in the depths of the Lord Ruler's most hellish prison. Kelsier snapped and found in himself the power of a Mistborn. A brilliant thief and natural leader, he turned his talents to the ultimate caper, with the Lord Ruler of himself as his mark. Mistborn is an all-around good book, with some weaker writing at times, but Sanderson's affinity for crafting worlds you can't just get lost in, but nearly drown in their meticulously thought-through complexity and integration of hard magic systems is already on full display. And with how influential Sanderson has immediately become for the fantasy genre, it's arguable that you will not be really up to date with what's going on in the genre right now without getting at least one of his books under your belt. And with how many of his fans, once they hear you're interested in fantasy, are going to be knocking on your door with extreme veracity, just trust me and give at least one of his books a go. And what I like about just trying Sanderson, because he is taking up so much space right now in the room, is you can then just early on make the decision that this author's not necessarily for me and go somewhere else, or find out that yeah, you absolutely vibe with Sanderson's efforts of mental health representation and complex redeeming main characters who are submersed in darkness but always have this like underlying sense of hope and upward momentum to them. Eventually stories overlap and there is a ask of a great commitment to understand Sanderson's larger Cosmere. Think of it as kind of MCU, but coming from one dedicated mind who really cares about the overall comprehensive story and not soulless boardrooms. But Mistborn as one book can be enjoyed, and while it certainly has one of those endings that goes series potential, you can be satisfied, satiated with just the first entry, which, just to clarify some confusion you may come across, it's called The Final Empire sometimes, but most of the time now the first book is just referred to as Mistborn. That was because having the final in a first book of a series was confusing, and everyone just called it Mistborn, so it's Mistborn.
It's good to know. I will plan my toga party accordingly.
Expect a hero's journey with solid characterization and a great appeal for just loving what fantasy can bring to the page in terms of wow. There is a term, Sanderlanche, for a reason. The endings of his books tend to be these awe-inspiring action sequences, and despite how tiring his fan base can be in the worst examples, overall becoming a part of it and just enjoying the ongoing celebration of Sanderson is intoxicating. And if you decide you're a Sanderson fan, you can take solace in the fact that he will keep you reading forever because, fun fact, he can publish faster than you can read. And then finally, there is so many people who want to read more fantasy that were on the Harry Potter train, but due to recent events, are not necessarily there anymore and are still curious about, a similar premise, execution. A book that's unabashedly fantasy, has that hero's journey, and it is accessible to all audiences, yet is somehow more. And I would say what I'm about to recommend here is far more than Harry Potter was even at its prime. I don't hate the series Harry Potter, just trying to remove J.K. Rowling from the situation as a whole. Harry Potter, I'm not gonna act like it doesn't have its appeal. It's one of the best-selling things ever for a reason. But a series that came out in a similar time frame that is getting treated much more like wine than milk by time is going to be Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials. The Golden Compass, Book 1 in His Dark Materials, is described as
Lyra is rushing to the cold far north, where witch clans and armored bears rule. North, where the gobblers take the children they steal, including her friend, Roger. North, where her fearsome uncle, Azrael, is trying to build a bridge to a parallel world. Can one small girl make a difference in such great and terrible endeavors? This is Lyra, a savage, a schemer, a liar, and as fierce and true a champion as Roger or Azrael could want. But what Lyra doesn't know is that to help one of them will be to betray another.
And where Harry Potter seemed to aggressively play it safe, His Dark Materials, I'll never get over the irony of so many religious fanatics being anti-Harry Potter while His Dark Materials was doing what it was doing at the same time and no one gave a shit. I would also say if you are really trying to seek out fantasy books that try and make a statement, are commenting on something, yes, Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials is for the younger and older audiences, but it does not dumb down or pull its punches in any way, shape, or form in its observations on religion of all things. Where Harry Potter did not really say much, which is fine for escapism, His Dark Materials came in with boxing gloves and cracked knuckles. It is Kayla's personal favorite fantasy series of all time, and I do not blame her. It is also one that my dad read to me growing up, and it can provide another window as well into more of a fantasy world, though I wouldn't worry too much about those labels. As the speculative fiction genres evolve, they're just kind of melting away. There is that angle though where His Dark Materials is not a traditional fantasy world, but instead brings an alternate Earth to the table with different kind of technologies coming into play, and you get to do this universe hopping that was way ahead of its time now that we're seeing an even greater rise of portal fantasy and things like that. Another video for another day. The demons concept within His Dark Materials as well kind of gives an extra little bonus point to nearly every character you're introduced to, because you get this literal external reflection of their soul. And with these religious themes swirling around the main character Lyra the whole time, Philip Pullman crafted a trilogy that has almost no fat without ever feeling like it's rushed or not fully taking advantage of its concepts. There is danger around every corner. Children are not off the table for being harmed. And if you even like some of that like horror that certainly works with you're a kid and still can get under your skin as an adult, His Dark Materials has this range of tone where you can feel the jubilation of total victory, but also the existential dread of being faced with what humans are truly capable of convincing themselves is good and right. And another reason I think this is a really good starting point overall for fantasy is His Dark Materials is brimming with personality in some really dynamic ways. If you like it for that just verbose, bombastic commentary, a strange recommendation, but one that I think is valid, is I would actually check out China Miéville's Perdido Street Station next, a book that is just as eager to use fantastical elements to commentate on our real world. If you like more of the alternate Earth approach to world building, and you also really enjoy the interconflict between the characters and the play that His Dark Materials is so well known for what is right and wrong, again, another strange recommendation, but one that I think absolutely lines up for that feature. Check out the Greenbone Saga, a book that also takes place in a very Earth-like society in a more modern setting and plays with a whole lot of who's really the good guy, bad guy here, and the inexorable pull towards moral failings that conflict can bring out in all of us. But if that isn't the reason you end up really liking His Dark Materials, a next stepping stone I would recommend is actually The Magicians by Lev Grossman. Not Magicians that I recommended from Raymond D. Fight. Magic and title, there's so much of that happening in fantasy, you're gonna have to get used to it. Just The Magicians, which also follows a young cast that Lev Grossman does an incredible job of not making feel like just a bunch of dumb adults, but actually makes them feel like kids who are intelligent, just not mature and experienced. He also does a wonderful job of capturing teenage angst and the determination that can be found in so many young people, complemented by the fear of an unknown world. The Magicians for me, especially on like the last time I kind of just skimmed through it, I actually found myself kind of comparing it to, in terms of what the main character's having to go through, to Spirited Away. This is going to turn into a recommendation for Lev Grossman's The Magicians, but that's fine. It's such a bountiful concept to take a younger character at that stage of life where things are changing and throw them into a new world and use that out of water setting to help us relate to a time in life that we all remember so fondly. It makes it so even though a character can be substantially younger than you, you absolutely end up relating to them because the emotions of what they're going through can ring so true to your own. It's like they quantum lock that experience over there in that foreign world to the real one in your heart. But if we are going to descend into the dark, we must have a recommendation that brings us into the light. And for that reason, I'm going to recommend Good Omens. Good Omens is described as, according to the nice and accurate prophecies of Agnes Nutter, the world's only totally reliable guide to the future, the world will end on a Saturday. Next Saturday, in fact, just after tea. People have been predicting the end of the world almost from its very beginning, so it's only natural to be skeptical when a new date is set for Judgment Day. This time, though, the armies of good and evil really do appear to be massing. The four bikers of the apocalypse are hitting the road, but both the angels and demons, well, one fast-living demon and a somewhat fussy angel would quite like the rapture not to happen. And someone seems to have misplaced the Antichrist. I almost put Discworld here, but that is a 34-book series, and I just can't put that on a new to the fantasy genre person's plate. And Good Omens has the added benefit of introducing two authors in one, both Terry Pratchett, the undisputed king of comedy with commentary for the fantasy genre, and Neil Gaiman, one of the best atmospheric and character writers as well as concept executioners, again, the genre's ever seen. We are so lucky to have gotten this collaboration before the unfortunate passing of Terry Pratchett. It was heralded as an instant classic for good reason. Fully willing to admit, sometimes when authors pair up, the end result is a clash of styles that comes across more messy than anything else. But when Terry and Neil came together, it was practiced ecstasy. Regret that one. And importantly, comedy has had an integral history to fantasy. Whether it was the early parodies of Lord of the Rings that hit the scene remarkably fast after that series was on the shelves, or the current of absurdism that has never left despite the changes the genre has gone through. Ha-has have been a tool within fantasy authors' kits, whether it is for insightful commentary or just goofs. And in terms of one-off, don't have to read another book within the fantasy space that's recent enough to still be kind of getting you excited for authors like Neil Gaiman who can still be putting things out, there isn't one better than Good Omens for me to recommend. And if you haven't read a comedy book before, which is actually a fairly common thing I've come across in my life, it's not for everybody. There are certainly people who just don't end up laughing from a joke on a page. And I feel like Good Omens is a really good way to test whether or not that's gonna be for you. And if you end up really liking the comedy, there is such an easy recommendation of just, then go to Discworld, because Discworld is Terry Pratchett, just having so much to say about the world around him while taking the piss out of all of it. If you wanna see a fantasy book devoted to the hard-working men and women of the Postal Service, he's got you, and it's going to make you cry in some scenes from laughter and just tears. Terry, what are you doing? But if the comedy wasn't for you, but you really enjoyed a lot of the elements brought to the table still within Good Omens, there is a hefty overlay of Neil Gaiman here. He is a concept writer, and Good Omens benefits from that. He also is an atmosphere writer on a level of a Lies of Locke Lamora. So if you want something that's a bit more modern and not steeped in Tolkien lore, but instead looking at a wide variety of inspiration for fantasy, I would then recommend checking out Neil Gaiman's American Gods. But that is just my list of recommended fantasy reads to get yourself going in the genres. And if you are someone who considers himself a fantasy fan, is there any specific kind of recommendation I didn't hit or a recommendation you totally disagree with me on? It's all subjective. Let me know in the comments down below. Like and subscribe if you have not already, and hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. Have a good one, y'all. Peace.